Bitcoin was, and I say this as a Bitcoin was very, very stagnant for a long time. That is all changing right now. What we're going to see this year and over the coming year is we're going to see tokenization hit Bitcoin in a totally new and very big way. One of the best things I think you can do is just look at Ethereum and what has happened with Ethereum and then map that onto Bitcoin. Tokenization will hit, token launches and launch pads, kind of like the ICO era, like the Uniswap of Bitcoin, like the Aave or Compound of Bitcoin. I've started calling it the new Bitcoin token economy because we're starting to see one after another, and we'll see more this year already, standards coming out on how you can create tokens on Bitcoin. And we're going to see Taproot Assets is a new standard coming out, ZK Coins, which I think is very likely to be released this year, RGB, which is coming out very soon. These are all new standards around tokenization. As more and more of these standards come out and they start to gain adoption and usership, we're going to see this massive growth of people looking to bring speculation and economic value to Bitcoin in new ways. And that is going to make Bitcoin DeFi more relevant than ever.
Yago, is DeFi on Bitcoin as good as Bitcoin on Ethereum? Because I feel like now we've had a couple years to try it out. What's going on with this?
So the answer is a definite yes or no. And what I mean by that is certain parts of it are way better and certain parts of it are still lagging behind. There's a lot going on in Bitcoin right now, more than I remember going on in Bitcoin at any given time, let's say since like 2016. It's an extremely exciting time. And I'll talk about it. Like one part of that is what I've been calling the new Bitcoin token economy. And we can get into that. But Bitcoin DeFi looks very, very different from the rest of DeFi. It's moving more slowly. It's less well integrated. It's harder to use. It's younger. It's less mature. But at the same time, it's built on much more solid foundations. Different teams in different ways are taking different approaches to this. But if you look at the way Bitcoin community and Bitcoin ethos builds DeFi, it's much more focused on sound finance versus YOLO finance. It's much more focused on creating tools which people can use for real life financial transactions. It's much more about wealth preservation than it is about speculation. And that plays into the communities, it plays into the technology, much more of an emphasis on decentralization, much more of an emphasis on good governance, much more of an emphasis on, dealing with things that, in fact, we don't almost hear about in the Ethereum or the rest of the crypto space, like systemic risk. Right. And there's a lot of systemic risk in Ethereum around centralization with liquid staking, around stable coins having such control. Like if USDT or USDC, for whatever reason, go down, all of DeFi, except for Bitcoin DeFi, will go down with them. And so there's much more of an emphasis on robustness. And, the kind of people that we see using Bitcoin DeFi are different. They tend to be older. They tend to be wealthier. There's more women on average, based on what we know, and more technically savvy at this point, I think, as well. And it's just people who are, a lot of the people who use Bitcoin DeFi refuse to touch DeFi of other kinds because they're more concerned about, how do you separate the wheat from the chaff?
And what are some of these top Bitcoin DeFi projects that people would know about? Like I think about Ethereum, obviously, of the Aaves, the compounds. In Bitcoin DeFi, I know we have the Sovryns, but like what else is out there that's currently doing it?
Yeah, so I would say there's two primary ecosystems, and then there's a bunch of other plays. So there's the Sovryn ecosystem, and sort of like the wider rootstock sidechain ecosystem. There's the Stacks ecosystem. And so I kind of do it in the order of their size. And then in terms of like Bitcoin sidechains, quite a way behind both of those is Liquid, which was created by Blockstream. And then in between, sort of, if you got Sovereign Stacks and then sort of Liquid, in between you got a whole bunch of different tools like Atomic Exchange with DLCs, and you've got the Ordinal space, which has its own sort of right now quite clunky exchanges. And there's Nomics, which is sort of bringing Bitcoin and Bitcoin DeFi to the Cosmos ecosystem. So there's a whole bunch of experimentation going on right now. And that's what makes it so exciting.
Right. And before we get too deep into it, Yago, please introduce yourself to the Altcoin Daily audience. I know you're associated with Sovryn, but I know you have a big background in Bitcoin generally. Feel free to brag a little bit.
Sure. So I've been in Bitcoin for a while. I'm on to my fourth halving now. Got into Bitcoin in 2011. Have been really curious about crypto ever since it became a thing, but really I've been focused on Bitcoin. And it's because I'm more interested in sort of boots on the ground, real world changes, and recreating the economic system. I helped set up the first self-regulatory body, which is called the Digital Asset Transfer Authority. So Coinbase and Kraken and a whole bunch of other players. BitPay were part of that back in 2014. And after that, I created a company which was doing remittance primarily to East Asia and Africa using Bitcoin. And that company did very well, but I hated it. I was working with banks all the time. I was working with regulators all the time. And so that company was sold in 2017. And then for me, the big disappointment was that we hadn't seen an ecosystem of decentralized applications growing up around Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is very decentralized, but if you want to do anything with it, now you start going to a centralized player. And my view around security and decentralization is it happens in layers. It happens like an onion, right? And so we need to expand the security envelope of Bitcoin. And then in 2020, a bunch of devs that I had been familiar with for a while started showing me cool stuff that they were doing, and that became eventually Sovryn, which is a open source community driven project, which is the leading platform in Bitcoin DeFi.
Is Sovryn the best at what it does?
I think it is. I think in terms of robustness, in terms of having been around for now over 2 years, in terms of the size of the community of developers and just the community who are using it, in terms of the breadth of features. So, swaps, trades, limit orders, DAOs, NFTs, although that's a much smaller part of it, margin trading, borrowing and lending, and most recently, 0% interest borrowing with Bitcoin and Bitcoin-backed stablecoins has all been built out in 2 years. It's all extremely battle tested. And just in terms of sort of like volume and TVL, Sovryn today represents more than 50% of all Bitcoin DeFi. So it's not just the leader, it's bigger than all of the rest combined at the moment. And actually, I think growing faster.
Do you think DeFi on Bitcoin is proving itself to be a viable niche in the crypto DeFi space? Like versus 2 years ago, is Bitcoin DeFi still very much in the conversation, or more so, or how do you think about it?
I think conversation is happening in two different places. I would say that there's the conversation within the Bitcoin space where it is absolutely changing. So we're seeing just more and more people who are looking to build on Bitcoin. We're seeing people move from Ethereum to build on Bitcoin because they're concerned about the dev bloat and the fact that there's not like a single person alive today who really understands how Ethereum works. And they want to build on something permanent. And then sort of outside of like the strict Bitcoin space, there's what we can think of as the crypto world that is starting to be drawn into Bitcoin in totally new ways. And I've started calling it the new Bitcoin token economy, because we're starting to see one after another, and we'll see more this year already, standards coming out on how you can create tokens on Bitcoin. And I'm sure a lot of people who watch this show are familiar with ordinals, which have become a totally new way to do NFTs. There's a lot of innovation there, like recursive NFTs is a new Bitcoin invention. There's BRC20 tokens, and we're going to see Taproot assets is a new standard coming out. ZK coins, which I think is very likely to be released this year. RGB, which is coming out very soon. These are all new standards around tokenization. And as more and more of these standards come out and they start to gain adoption and usership, we're going to see this massive growth of people looking to bring speculation and economic value to Bitcoin in new ways. And that is going to make Bitcoin DeFi more relevant than ever. So I think we are seeing right now a renaissance in Bitcoin. Bitcoin was, and I say this as a Bitcoin was very, very stagnant for a long time. That is all changing right now. And it's not that surprising. Like NFTs was invented in Bitcoin, sidechains were invented in Bitcoin, tokenization was invented in Bitcoin. All of these ideas were sort of bubbling around 2013, 2014, 2016. And then when the block size wars happened, things stagnated in Bitcoin. And all of that creative energy is coming back.
What would you say is one of the best ways for an average crypto participant to participate in Bitcoin DeFi and, profit and do well? Is it kind of the same as crypto where you're just like looking closely at the trends and maybe Bitcoin tokens or Bitcoin NFTs and you're kind of jumping in and out of that? Or what advice would you give the new person who wants to do well here?
Well, a few things. First of all, get off centralized exchanges. I mean, how many times do we have to learn that lesson? Second, the way wealth is created is by focusing on wealth preservation first and then speculation second. So I would have a focus. I would look for ways to figure out which systems are going to last. And the way you look at that is like, what is the ethos of the community? How battle proven is the system? And are they sacrificing things like tokenomics for short-term gain? That happens a lot less in the Bitcoin space. And I think that's one reason to be long-term bullish. And then you need to start playing around. So if ordinals and NFTs are your thing, that's a great place to start. If tokenization is your thing, you could try with BRC20 and you'll see it's really difficult in comparison to like ERC20. But now with Taro, Taproot Asset, ZK coins coming out, I would watch this space. And then there are the platforms like the DeFi ecosystem on Stacks and in Sovryn, which is really easy to get into. And actually, there's a lot of hidden alpha there. So, interest rates on stable coins in Sovryn, for example, are between 7 and 9%. That's 4 times what you would be getting on Aave or Compound. And then, all of the strategy stuff that you could do and that, yield farmers were doing 2 years ago on Ethereum, the best opportunities right now are in Bitcoin. So it really depends what interests you. I would just get my hands dirty, start with small amounts. And then the other thing I would say is everyone should have their rainy day fund, which is money which is super liquid, is going to be super available to you. And some people keep their money in banks, some people keep their money in stable coins. I think there's a much better alternative now, which is Bitcoin-backed stablecoins. It has the security and decentralization of Bitcoin. It's more accessible in your bank. No one can take it away from you. And it's not like Tether or USDC, which because of a regulator or an accounting error or a fraud or any one of 1,000 other reasons, you could suddenly lose access to. So, people used to say everyone should hold like 1 to 5% of their worth in Bitcoin. I think anyone in crypto should now think about 1 to 5% of their wealth in Bitcoin-backed stablecoins.
Interesting. Thinking about the next few years of this, give us some predictions. Where's Sovryn going to be 5 years from now? Where's Bitcoin DeFi going to be 5 years from now?
Yeah, so I think what we're going to see this year and over the coming year is we're going to see tokenization hit Bitcoin in a totally new and very big way. We're going to see entirely new ways of dealing with tokenization. One of the best things I think you can do is just look at Ethereum and what has happened with Ethereum and then map that onto Bitcoin. So, where Ethereum was in, let's say, 2016 is where Bitcoin is now. And so there are going to be basic things like tokenization will hit. There'll probably be things like, token launches and launch pads, kind of like the ICO era. There's going to be basic things like swaps, like the Uniswap of Bitcoin, like the lending platform, like the Aave or Compound of Bitcoin. Those things are going to emerge. And then 2 years out, I think we're going to start seeing rollups to Bitcoin, which is going to be a complete game changer in terms of scalability, in terms of speed, privacy, and security. And 5 years out, my sense is it's very likely we will start to see things like low cost or zero cost transactions, which are fully private, Bitcoin-backed stablecoins becoming adopted in places like El Salvador as a standard payment system. We're going to see crypto becoming something which people are using in their everyday lives without even really thinking of it as crypto. And at that point, I think the likelihood that we're going to be looking at sort of like 1,000 chains is very, very small. My guess would be looking at 1 or 2 platforms with a huge ecosystem of layers above them, things like Lightning Network, rollups, and stuff like that. And so I think 5 years from now, Bitcoin's still going to be the biggest. The dominance of Bitcoin will be larger, but it won't be just Bitcoin. The asset will be all of the assets that are built on Bitcoin. And we will see sort of how the relationship between Bitcoin and Ethereum plays out. But my sense is, the Solanas and Cardanos and BSCs of the world are going to be vastly less valuable, and Ethereum and definitely Bitcoin are going to be vastly more, much more complex, a lot of cool stuff, things that we can't even imagine.
And you put Ethereum in that boat as well with Bitcoin.
Yeah, I don't think Ethereum's look. I hold very little Ether, just enough to play around with it and learn about the ecosystem. I think fundamentally Ethereum is insecure, and is going to trend more and more, is already trending more and more, and is going to trend more and more towards centralization. That can be a strength. Large corporations or governments might like that. I think if you're interested in freedom, Bitcoin is going to be the place to be. I don't think Ethereum over the time frame that we're discussing is going to disappear. I think both Ethereum and Bitcoin are going to see the world mostly consolidate around them. I just think that Bitcoin's going to do it bigger. All of the advantages that Ethereum has had over Bitcoin are going to, in terms of, a developer being attracted to developers, scalability, modularity. I think those are disappearing over the next few years, and that's when it gets really interesting.
Is there any argument, or what do you think about this, that assets built on Bitcoin are safer from regulators? Like Bitcoin itself has, for good reason, has been given a pass by regulators. Are assets going to be, or probably not? Like, what do you think?
I think from a legal perspective, there's not that much of a difference. But from a perception perspective, there's a huge difference. And I have already seen companies and sort of regulators talk to me about it and talk as if things being built on Bitcoin are more legitimate than things being built elsewhere. I don't think they're right from like a strict interpretation of the law, but I think that difference in perception is going to make a very, very big difference.
Yago, give us final thoughts for the Altcoin Daily audience about Sovryn, about Bitcoin DeFi in general. And I do want to encourage your audience, check out the links below, follow Yago, check out Sovryn, look more into Bitcoin DeFi. But Yago, final thoughts.
Yeah, so the game hasn't really started yet. Everyone's building out features. Can we get more smart contracts? Can we do more transactions per second? Can we make them cheaper? But we're almost 14 years in now. That's like a teenager. Bitcoin has maintained its dominance for a very simple reason. This whole thing is not about features. It's not technology. Looking at this as like the new .com bubble or a new tech bubble is the wrong way to think about it. What we're building are entirely new governance systems. Bitcoin is a governance system for money. And what it's designed to do is create a reliable way of tracking and transferring property rights outside of the realm of borders, outside of the realm of governments. And the reason it's maintained that level of dominance is because really nobody's been competing with Bitcoin on being permaware, on being credibly neutral. Everyone has gone in the direction of technology. So I think the big message I try to communicate to people who are a little bit more advanced, like they're not beginners, is be very careful about the mental model you have when examining things. If it's about shiny widgets and gadgets, if it's about bells and whistles, if it's about features, that's the wrong way to be thinking about this entire space. The way to be thinking about this space is who is building entirely new governance systems and who is figuring out how to allow you to be part of that and to become and to monetize that. That's the game. So Bitcoin is permaware. It's a system for property rights, and we're going to start bringing a whole bunch of new types of property, digital property, and eventually physical property into the Bitcoin realm. And it remains to be seen whether other projects will reach that level of reliability. I think my big one-line takeaway is have a very long-term view on this. The people I know who have done best in any form of investing, and definitely in crypto, are the people who have taken a long-term view with most of their investment. And if they are speculating or gambling, it's with the fun money. That's the casino.